Hello and welcome to the PhD Life Raft podcast. I'm Emma Brzezinski and today I am talking to the wonderful Nicole Brown. And our conversation focuses on the practice of reflective journaling and how this can be a support for yourself, but also help you to develop ideas and know what not to develop as well while you're on your PhD journey. So I do hope you enjoy this episode. Good morning, Nicole.
Hello, good morning. Good to see you.
Thank you so much for being here. I am very excited to talk to you. I came across your work through your brilliant book on ableism and went to that conference too. So it's awesome. And even though we're not actually actively talking about that today, I would totally recommend that to people. And I'm going to put the link to that in the show notes because it is fantastic material. But then I found out not only do you do that, but you're also doing stuff about journaling and reflective journaling. And I was like, right, we need to talk. And you said yes, which was fantastic. So thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you very much. I'm always very humbled when people find my work and find it interesting. I mean, that's obviously the kind of the best compliment you can get in academia, really.
And well, it is great work, great work. So we always begin with asking people about their own journey. I know you're currently doing a PhD just now alongside lots of other stuff. Is that right?
I'm finished.
Oh, you've just finished. Brilliant. Brilliant.
Yeah, so I started, I came into academia relatively late. I had a career as a secondary school teacher. I then took a career break and I had my own translation company working from home. And only then did I start doing little bits and pieces in teacher education at university. So I came at this really as my third career, if you like. Wow. So when I started my doctorate in 2015, it was really because I could realize that I would not be able to have a career in academia, the kind I would want, right, if I didn't have a doctorate. So I had a very specific reason for why I wanted to do the PhD. And yes, there is the idea that you want to do something for the greater good and that you want to make a change in the world. Of course there is. But it was also a very pragmatic choice that I had gotten as far as I could get without the PhD in the kind of job environment that I found myself in. So I really needed the PhD for professional development as well. And that's how I started it. And I did part-time. And obviously, if you look at the statistics, part-time students, mature students, they're all the students that fail and drop out. So statistically, I'm quite unlikely. I was ever quite unlikely to finish my work. But actually, I got it done in 4.5 years.
Amazing.
So in January 2020, I had my viva. And I have finished my work and I'm a doctor now.
Fantastic. And I think it is really useful to hear about a kind of very pragmatic route through. And actually, I'm wondering if that was helpful in terms of like really clear of like why I'm doing this, because I think everybody has that kind of wet Wednesday. It's like, what on earth am I doing here? And
well,
actually,
to be honest, yes, I think for me it was very much that pragmatic line that took me through the PhD. I didn't meander. I didn't stray. I had a very clear idea of what I wanted to do research-wise, how I wanted to do it. To be fair, I must say that because I came at this rather late in my career, I had already done research projects. I was already teaching research methods. So certain elements of the work that PhD students would usually need to do, I didn't need to do anymore because I had already been teaching all of that. So I didn't need to find out about epistemology, for example, because I knew exactly where I was going to go. So in that sense, I came at it with, quite a clear idea, a very clear idea, which most doctoral students probably wouldn't have. But once you have got that, you can then take that pragmatic route that I took and basically just focus everything on that. So whenever I had an idea of doing something, it was, okay, is this going to get me to the thesis more quickly? Then I'm doing it. If this doesn't help me get to the thesis more quickly, then I'm parking it. And that's actually how the reflective journal book came about. That was one of the ideas that was parked.
I love it. I love that for so many reasons. So I love the kind of, is this taking me forward with the thesis? No. And it reminds me of I had a fantastic advisor on my PhD, I had a lovely supervisor, but he said to keep these boxes of kind of all the ideas, because I have loads of ideas all the time. And he was like, literally have a physical box where you put the stuff in, and that's for after the PhD. It's for after the PhD, and that that builds you up a lifetime's worth of work, doesn't it? So I love that this reflective journal work, this deep work that you're engaged in, was a kind of one of those boxes. And
actually, in the book, I am writing about an ideas box. So I'm saying that now. Yes. So I'm saying that now, so that it's very clear I haven't actually stolen the idea.
I do have to, yes, and I haven't paid you any money to say that either, have I? What I think is brilliant is like it proves that, because I think sometimes you say that to PhD students, they go, oh yeah, no, but what you mean is actually put it away. It's like, well, no. Actually you almost certainly will come back to it, because once you get involved in kind of teaching and the academic stuff, you don't necessarily have that thinking time. So really this is it's a mine of ideas, and really note it down and then really come back to it.
It's not just that, there's a lot more to that as well, because a lot of the PhD students I have met and that have started together with me, once they had the thesis submitted and the viva done and then the corrections done, they came into this slump of not really knowing what to do with themselves. Suddenly the big part of their everyday routine has gone, because no longer you don't have that thing anymore that you focus on. So suddenly they are kind of at loose end. They don't really know what to do with themselves. They haven't really got a focus on well, what could I do next. But if you've got this ideas box, you're never running out of stuff, because there'll always be something in there. And okay, you go through it and you think then, oh, well, at the time this may have looked like a brilliant idea. Actually, it's not that brilliant. Well, don't throw it away, just park it, because 2 years later, perhaps you do find actually this was a good idea. So, you're never running out of ideas. You've always got something to do. And then you can decide on whether or not this is, worth your time to be spent on it or not.
Love it. Love it. So we're already starting thinking about the reflective journaling, and you have a book coming out about this, which I am looking forward to. It's pre-order. So tell us a little bit, because some people I think won't even know what reflective journaling means. And other people would be like, yes, I want to use this alongside my PhD, but I'm not quite sure how to do it. So tell us a little bit about it.
So the whole thing was, everybody tells you to keep a research journal. It doesn't really matter at what level you're doing your research, whether that's undergraduate, postgraduate research. Everybody tells you to keep a research journal. And I'm including myself here. When I was master's level supervisor, I am, as part of the teaching education courses and all of that, I also said all of the time, keep a research journal. But we don't really teach how to keep a research journal and how to make the most of it, and what this actually means. We just tell everybody to keep it, but no, there is no guidance around it. And that was the big frustration. So it was really funny, because I, as a teacher, I've always been reflective about my practice. So reflective journaling or reflective thinking is part of what you do in everyday life anyway, because as you go into the classroom, you teach, you reflect on what happens, what worked, what didn't work, why did it work, why did it not work, what's the kind of variables that are at play here. So you're always kind of reflecting on that. It's a very specific way of working, really, and it's quite embedded in what you do. And yet, when I then started my PhD, obviously the first thing that I heard was keep a research journal. And I was like, yeah, whatever. But actually, once you start looking at it, it's like, well, I didn't really know how to keep a research journal effectively. And it's like, well, suddenly you're starting to worry, am I writing everything down that I need to write down? Am I writing enough down? Am I not writing enough down? Am I writing down the things that are actually relevant because they seem relevant now, but are they going to be relevant in 2 years' time when I'm writing my thesis? So suddenly there was this great big question about how do you actually keep a research journal? And at the same time, so that was kind of one strand to how I got to starting out about thinking about the whole process. The next strand then was, obviously, a lot of the research journals and reflective journals that I see as part of my teaching and my practice are written ones. So they are, like following a very clear guidance, this is what I've done, this is what I've observed, this is what happened, and this is what I'm thinking about it. So there's a very specific way of how to do that. In teacher education, we've got all these reflective models of teaching reflective models of journal writing or whatever that you do. So the reflective models are all sorts of different ones, but the easiest one is the what, so what, now what. So it's like, you're going through the different kind of levels of analysis, and it's just, okay, what's happened? You're describing that. So what does that mean? Now, what does that mean for the future? So there is kind of an analysis of the description and then a meta-analysis of your analysis. So that's how it really works at a simple level. But again, most of that is in writing, and actually written form is not natural for everybody. And it certainly isn't natural in some contexts, because sometimes we know that words fail us, and actually, language is quite imprecise in many ways too. I always give the example of headaches. If you think of a headache, the headache before you get fever is different to the headache that you have after a hangover, or the headache that you get when you have a migraine. So how do you use the right word to describe exactly that headache? So that's where we find, that the language is often quite imprecise, it's inconsistent, and people struggle with writing it. And to be honest, another element is that you kind of feel like you have to write something just for the sake of writing it. And that's not necessarily the best reflective entry. So it's kind of trying to experiment with that. And that's how I came to it, to actually say, reflective writing isn't necessarily writing, it's reflective journaling. And that's the whole book is built up on the idea that we're talking about reflective journaling, and journaling can be taking many different forms. So for example, many people will be familiar with the bullet journal, for example, which is a very specific way of journaling. And then within the arts, we've got art journaling, where people will be just paint your feelings, paint your emotions or your observations. Yep. And that kind of journaling is also a very, very valid approach to reflective and thinking. So that's really the idea behind the book. And then the book itself just takes you through all of these different options. I'm not saying that there is one that's right or wrong, because what works for me may not work for you, and what works for me today may not work for me tomorrow. So there is so much flexibility. But what I'm always trying to say is that don't live with the expectation of having to do it in a particular way. Try to experiment and try out different things. And that's what the book really is about, just trying to show different kinds of journaling and different tasks and different equipment that we can use for journaling purposes.
Love that. I love it. And it's that sense, isn't it, of journaling as being a kind of conversation with yourself. So it's not a diary, in terms, because I think often people think that's it. I've got to write down everything I've done. And it's kind of, well, No, actually, you'll dive in so deep on a PhD journey, don't you? And you go to these places, these amazing places, but then when you come out of them again, it's hard to kind of totally capture that. So it's kind of do that work for yourself in the moment, capture that, and like you say, you might journal in a way that's very kind of expressive, and there might be images or collages or sounds, and that will take you back into that experience, so that when you do come to writing it up, you've actually captured the layers of that. I love it.
But it's also, there's a lot more to that, because, like I said, the keeping the research journal, you're keeping that for a particular reason. So some of it is, yes, you're trying to make sure that you remember certain bits and pieces. But for example, when you reflect on your reading, that kind of reflective entry may look quite different from the reflective entry that you have after an interview that you have just done with a participant, for example. So you've got all these different kinds of ways of actually taking notes. And again, there are ways of making those things practical. And for example, the ideas box is one of them, where it's literally just writing down the idea and stick it some. Other people may have it as an Excel spreadsheet. It doesn't really matter in which way it works for you, but it's just a way of capturing that note, that thought, because in 2 years' time, you're not going to remember it. And you will be having it there, knowing that there was something, but what exactly was it? I can't quite grasp at it. And that's where the note-taking comes in. So keeping a reflective journal, or a research journal, as I call it a research journal, is actually a practical tool to get yourself organized, as well as offering opportunities to analyze and bring you more data, and quite interesting data too.
Yes, fantastic. And as I know, sort of as a therapist, that processing through journaling, because you don't always know what the information is until you take time to reflect on it, and you actually, oh yes, that's the thing that's coming through. Oh yes, that's the thing. So this is brilliant, and I would totally recommend, if people haven't done this before, to kind of experiment with it and find your own way through it. Because
there is a little more to that, because sometimes you kind of miss writing something down, and like 2 years later you suddenly realize, oh, actually I should have written that down and I didn't. And at that stage, people then start beating themselves up for having been stupid or naive or whatever it is, not having realized at the time how important that is. But actually, there is a way of capturing those missed moments too, in a systematic way. And again, that's one of the kind of tools or examples that the research journal book that I've written is about showing how we can deal with those missed moments. Because once you start capturing everything, you become this photographer on a vacation where you just do all of those photos and you miss the actual vacation because you've not actually focused on what's going on. Right. So that can't be the right way to deal with it. Right. But within the research journal, when you're saying, okay, I'm doing what I can, and I'm not going to capture everything because I'm going to focus on everything that's important now. And if I do realize later on I've missed something that's important, here is my strategy of how I can cope with that. Mm-hmm. So that's quite an important element of it as well.
Yeah. So it is a way of supporting, helping yourself, conversing with yourself, taking yourself deeper, reflecting on it. It's, does it all, people. Does it all. Brilliant. Well, hopefully we've encouraged people to give that a go and see how it might work for them. I always ask people, rather unfairly, but I do always ask people if they have a kind of top tip to take away. So what would you offer us?
So I've got kind of two things really that I always say to everybody is, first of all, is don't be afraid to experiment, and just give everything a go. but at the same time, don't get too hung up if something doesn't work for you. Try it a few times, but if you find that it doesn't work for you, then let go. Don't get hung up on having to pursue this. If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you, and you have to kind of accept that too. And the other thing that I always say to everybody is the word fail is really an acronym, and it's an acronym for first attempt in learning. And that's really, really powerful, because it basically shows that it doesn't really matter what you do, whether that's part of your teaching, part of your research, part of your journaling, whatever it is. We are allowed to fail, because really it's just a first attempt. You know, it gets difficult when you fail in the same way every time. That's when it becomes problematic. But if you fail in that sense, you know, just see it as your first attempt in learning, learn from it, do it better next time. That's the only thing we can ask of ourselves. So I'm always saying really that the top tip is to cut yourself some slack, to not get too bogged down with things, and to just say to yourself, I'm learning here, and that's part of it.
Yes, I think that, as we know, so many PhD students have that perfectionist streak, and that can be a real strength, but it also can be really paralysing. So I think that's brilliant. First attempt in learning. I'm writing that down. I've got it. Nicole, thank you so much for all of that. We will have the details in the show notes of where to find your information, where to find and pre-order the book, because it's not quite out yet, is it?
No, it's going to come out in the autumn.
Okay.
I think October 2021.
Brilliant. We'll have the information so that you know where to find that, and the links for Nicole. And also don't forget that you can sign up for the newsletter too if you would like to, because we always put some extra bits in for the podcast there. Thank you again, Nicole.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
And thank you all for listening. Thank you.